The resolution before the House today is be it resolved that Canada requires all foreign companies recruiting Canadians graduating from STEM programs to reimburse the government for the subsidized education provided to those grads. On behalf of the House, I would like to express a sincere welcome to our three judges, Amir Gobani, Joyce Fordyce, Umar Altaf. Each speaker will deliver a 7-minute constructive speech. Either the first or second speaker of each team will also get a 4-minute reply speech. Points of information will be allowed during the constructive speeches only, but not during the first and last minute of the speeches. I will bang the desk after the first minute like so, and again with 1 minute remaining, to signal the time in which points of information may be raised. For each speech, 15 seconds of grace time will be allowed for you to conclude your thought. After each speech, I will immediately call upon the next debater to begin their address. There will be no points of order or privilege. Heckling is also prohibited. Are there any questions regarding the rules? Great. At this point, we wish to remind all those in attendance that audience participation in the debate is prohibited. Light support is permitted in the parliamentary form of tapping on tables, like so. We remind spectators to keep this applause respectful so as to not interfere with the speeches. Any spectators deemed to be disruptive will be dealt with accordingly at the discretion of JDC West staff, with no warnings given. Please remain seated until the round has concluded and competitors have exited the room. Do not use cell phones or electronic devices at any point during the debate, and please take the time now to ensure that they are silent or turned off. Thank you. I now call upon the first speaker to introduce the government case for no longer than 7 minutes.
You are a tech company in Canada. You are literally struggling to find competent workers because the US, with its larger economy and stronger dollar, is able to poach top Canadian talent and the Canadian taxpayers' dime. This is why today in this debate, we stand for a Canadian economic strength and for Canadian tax dollars to be used for Canada, and that is why we propose, when coming to the motion, be it resolved that Canada require all foreign companies recruiting Canadians graduating from STEM programs to reimburse the government for subsidized education provided to these grads. So for this speech, I'm going to be doing a couple things. First, I'm going to be going over our model, and then I'm going to go into our few points, one of principle and the second of brain drain. So let's first get into our model. So basically, much like what the resolution states, that any foreign company that is recruiting Canadians graduating from STEM programs has to reimburse the government for the subsidized education. The info slide gives us a stat about $25,000 per year. We have a couple of key distinctions here. One, in our model, it's only for recruiting Canadians leaving graduations, not necessarily a Canadian that spends, let's say, 10 years in the Canadian workforce and wants to obtain a job elsewhere from a foreign company. So we're just talking about like recruiting Canadians just leaving graduation. And two, the money returned will go directly back into this subsidized STEM education program. So for every one person who potentially leaves Canada to go to the US or another foreign country, this money would go directly back into the system to help one other grad that is working through STEM education. So for every one student that leaves, another student benefits. So overall, we're just giving more STEM education for everybody in Canada. So basically, let's go into our first point. That is going to be a principle. So this is split up into two subpoints here. 1A, the purpose of a subsidized STEM education, and B, Canadian company taxes. So let's get into our first subpoint, subpoint A, the purpose of a subsidized STEM education. So this is to provide education for STEM careers, to encourage Canadians to enter STEM, and to create a STEM workforce for Canada, specifically Canada. That's why we're subsidizing, putting all this money into these programs. So specifically, we are creating a workforce for Canada tailored to the Canadian workforce and what Canada's vision is. A vision to recognize STEM as the future for Canada, prioritizing subsidized STEM education, to introduce green initiatives in Canada, to help bolster our economy in Canada. So just as an example, a lot of Canadian universities have very tailored programs, invest a lot of time, a lot of energy in creating tailored programs for oil and gas research, sustainable energy research, and mining and coal engineering, and the list goes on and on and on. And what we're seeing here is that one key distinction of Canadian universities is that they invest so much time into these STEM curriculums, these STEM ideas. So it is unfair for when these students go into these programs for them to just leave and go to the States or go to another foreign company, because Canada is not returning any of the benefits of all this money they're investing in. So that brings me to my subpoint B, that of Canadian company taxes. So basically, Canadian companies are already paying Canadian taxes that are going back into these subsidized STEM programs, while foreign companies are benefiting from the talent coming out of Canada, but not actually paying into the program, which we find completely unfair on our side of the house. What we want to see is that these companies, if they want this Canadian talent, they have to buy into it as well, just as we are in Canada. So we're not saying that we're going to restrict every single Canadian from leaving the US to go to leaving Canada to go to some foreign company. What we're saying here is that we just want these foreign companies to also invest in the system. If they recognize that there is Canadian talent, they also need to put their money into it as well. So another thing that I just want to point out here is that a lot of reasons why there is draw for these Canadians to leave to America or another foreign company is because they these foreign companies, specifically in the US, have higher wages, you're getting paid more. But a lot of the reason is for that is because in these American countries, university is a lot more expensive, and people leave with a lot more debt. What we're showing you here is that these Canadians aren't leaving university with debt because it is subsidized. So they're being pulled to America to take advantage of this whole system, which we don't necessarily think is fair. Can you, I'll have your POI. Sorry.
Madam Speaker, does the House fail to recognize other talent pools such as Europe that have subsidized education in STEM? They would be equally as capable of filling these roles that the US companies want. Thanks.
All right, that is a great question, but also we're showing you this just in the status quo. A lot of Canadians are going to the US, but we also recognize that there are other actors. So let's get into our second point of this debate, and that's the idea of brain drain. So basically in the status quo, the most requested degrees are in science, specifically in computer science for different jobs, and they are in high demand in Canada. But despite Canada having one of the larger programs in universities, there's still a lack of these STEM grads in Canada to fill these jobs because they're leaving Canada to go to other foreign companies. So with this motion, we restrict this brain drain because students will be more likely to stay in Canada because there are more opportunities for them, and Canadian companies don't have the opportunity to grow in the status quo because all of these grads are just leaving to the US. All of the talent is leaving to the US or other companies around the world. So, however, on our side of the house, we recognize that students will still leave, they'll still pay, companies will still pay for this talent, but we are just trying to make sure that we concentrate some of the talent in Canada, concentrate some of it in Canada, so we have a fighting chance because we aren't able to pay as much. So, just with that, I just want to clarify something that we found in the info slide that was completely really important to this round. The Canadian government pays $25,000 a year for subsidizing this education. That's $100,000 per student. Canada is investing so much money into this talent, and they're not receiving any benefit from it, because people are leaving. And with such an expensive policy as this, we believe that Canadian society should also reap the benefit. So what we're showing you on side government is we're showing you a system where Canadian talent is concentrated in Canada. Thank you.
We shall now hear from the first speaker from side opposition for no longer than 7 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I thank you for your time. I remember being a kid and playing with my brother. Would always play Legos, and he loved it. He knew he wanted to be an engineer since he was a little kid. And put yourself in my brother's shoes. That's what he did. He put his head down. He worked hard. He got the grades he needed to get. Went to university in Canada. And then when he sent his resume to some of the best places in the United States, like Silicon Valley, he got accepted. And his dream came true. Now, in my brother's situation, put yourself in my brother's shoes. If this were to happen with this policy in place, after all the hard work my brother puts in, and all the passion and all the work he puts in for something that he loves, his resume would be overlooked. Now why is that? It's because we're putting a $100,000 price tag in our Canadian graduates. That's completely ridiculous thing to do. And now, I would like to talk about some of the points that they have. Yes?
Why do we then give this money to just engineers? Why don't we give $100,000 to every student? Under what basis do we head this program now?
So, I think Senate government is a little confused on how subsidization works. When you go to the university, you do get the money for it. You do get the funding for it. So everybody in different fields is getting covered for it. So I don't really understand where that question is coming from. But I want to address some of the points that they brought up. And really where they fall short is that if we hinder the opportunity of our Canadian students, then they will just take the talent from somewhere else, from Europe, from Mexico. They have incredible universities. Absolutely.
There's nothing that prevents a Canadian student from going and studying in the States and paying the full burden of cost of that education. Specifically though, if they go to those countries, they don't pay into the programs that allow them to have those programs in the first place.
What's the question? Thank you very much. Anyways, and that's where they fall short. We are putting Canadian students at a complete disadvantage with the global markets because it's a global economy and it's simple economics. When you look at a talent pool, are you going to hire somebody that has a $100,000 price tag on the head? Or are you just going to outsource to Europe? Some of the best technical colleges are there as well. So it frankly doesn't make sense. Thank you. Now I'd like to start with some of my points. And the reality is that this policy limits Canadian freedoms. Now, why is that? Why is that? Because we're limiting Canadian opportunities. Because companies are smart and they want to make smart choices and not just throw away their money. And they will hire talent where they don't have to pay a $100,000 bonus just to acquire them, which is frankly absolutely ridiculous. So we're limiting the opportunities as Canadian, which frankly, as a government, is completely against our moral obligation. And we will not stand by that. We need to provide our Canadians with the best opportunities that we can for them. Now, this is honestly a regressive policy. Why? We put the subsidy in place for a reason, and then we just turn around and indirectly throw it back at the students? That's ridiculous. We put it in place so our people have an opportunity at education, at better lives, and are contributing to wherever they may decide to go. Another point I'd like to point out, personally I'm an international student. I pay $11,000 a semester, which is a lot higher compared to other students. And I fully understand why, and I respect it. And I feel like the Canadian government needs to understand this. And it's because every single Canadian, as they were growing up, they were contributing into the tax system. So it is rightfully theirs for the education to be subsidized. I understand that I have to pay a premium because I never contributed with my taxes while I was growing up. But the people going in, they contributed for 18 years, money, so their education could be subsidized. It is rightfully theirs. They're proposing to steal away from the Canadian people. I will not be taking any more POIs. I've taken enough. Thank you. Now, this makes Canadians unemployable. And I think that's being made pretty clear. If you run a business, like, you're going to go for a good talent pool that doesn't have a $100,000 tag in their head. And also, as Canadians, I believe that we have beautiful values. I love what our country stands for. That's why I support global citizens. I want our citizens to be around the world. I want them to spread our values, spread our message, so people can share the same beauty of a country that we have in this nation. Now, global citizenship is a huge part, and something that I think that they're failing to take into consideration is that a lot, the talent pool, the demand for these jobs, the massive tech demand, is not in Canada. It's in the US. And if students who are hoping to go into the industries, like my brother, realize that, then in the long term, they're driving students out of STEM fields. They're making students choose, no, you know what, I'm not going to go into it because I know I'm not going to be employed because I'm uncompetitive when compared to students from other places. We're encouraging people to go out of STEM fields. What they recognize is our very future. That's a broken system. That's a broken system. Now, finally, we're punishing people like my own brother for pursuing their passions, for pursuing what they want to love. We live in a country where people, thank God, are able to, if they work hard, put their head down, get their dreams, and do the things that they want to do, the things that they love. But now with this policy, no. We decide what we're doing. We're cutting off your opportunities, and we don't want you to contribute to the world. That's what this policy is saying. Now, yes, there is some benefits to the policy that they're proposing. Nobody can deny that. But they're punishing people for pursuing a passion. So my question is, there might be some benefits as listed, although when taking into consideration that there's a huge talent pool that they can hire from that doesn't cost $100,000, still there might be some benefits, but my question is, at what cost? And it's at the cost of the freedoms and opportunities of the Canadian people. Thank you very much for your time.
I thank the member for his remarks. I now call upon the second speaker from side government to speak for no longer than 7 minutes.
Panel, I appreciate the very emotional appeal we got on the first opposition today. Here's the problem with first opposition. He assumes that everyone's life and everyone's career path is exactly like his and exactly like his brother's. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not true. That's not how the world works. Big mischaracterizations of opposition. Big, big, big problems. First off, their entire premise of all their points relies on the fact that A, nobody wants to work in Canada, which we think is patently untrue. I think there are many, many people who would love to work in Canada who would actually seek out working here. Second, they're making the assumption that all these jobs are not available in Canada, that people cannot be employed in Canada. Again, patently unfalse. We would say that the majority of grads from Canadian universities, A, want to work in Canada, and B, currently work in Canada anyways. We would say at that point, they're talking about only a very, very small portion of the population. But second, we may completely mischaracterize the type of actors we're talking about. Because let's be honest, the big tech companies like Microsoft, Facebook, Google can simply pay and afford this anyways, right? The companies that we are really talking about are the startups, are the mid-sized technology companies. These are the relevant actors in the debate that their side completely does not address in their speech. I mean, for that point, I hope they address in their second. But we also though think that these actors, because these actors are these smaller programs, we think here's why we benefit. Here's the distinct benefits. We think that largely these small, these medium-sized tech startups are the ways of the future and the ways to push forward the Canadian tech industry. We think at the point at which it makes more sense for Canadian graduates to go to the United States, to go to Europe, we think that there's a fundamental problem that these tech startups do not have the jobs and do not have the capability. Again, we think companies like Microsoft, companies like Apple, companies like Google will always have a strong demand for employees. As mentioned in the info slide, we are talking about companies like Hootsuite who have a very, very difficult time recruiting employees because they simply cannot offer them the same compensation packages. They cannot offer them the same employment structure and what can. We think in this case, and as we're going to explain, that principally there's a number of reasons why we should have this. First off, their main idea that comes out of their speech is limiting Canadian freedoms. As I told you in my POI, You can go to another institution. We are perfectly fine if you want to go study in the United States, to which point you accept the full cost and the full burden of your education. We think the distinct difference between the Canadian system and the American system, which they don't differentiate in opposition, is that the Canadian government funds the burden. We think, though, the distinct thing when you fund that burden is there's an expectation you contribute back to society. Opposition tries to respond to this by saying, well, I'll take you in a second, you pay 18 years of taxes before you go to school. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what side opposition is doing, but I sure was not working a very high-paying job. I'm going to go find out 18 years old. Because most high-paying jobs, and most jobs that will actually cover the cost and contribute back to society, are the jobs you get after you have your degree. At the point at which they're telling you, like, no, you've already contributed, patently false, I don't know what they're talking about. But yeah, one of you, who wants to go?
Does Thai government fail to recognize the taxes that the family pays for their kids as they're growing up throughout their life?
Yes, but those taxes also cover the parents who originally went to university. The social programs for the parents that went to these universities, and they're covering all the generations before them, right? Like, the parents don't exclusively pay for their children. It's the expectation the children will later on pay. In a sense, we are almost saying that they are entering into a contract by going to these Canadian universities, that they're taking these subsidies, and they're going to pay it back later through their taxes. These companies are going to pay it back through their taxes. I think that is a very reasonable request to make of these people. No thank you. Next though, they get to this idea about like, well, this is going to make Canadians not competitive with like European institutions, whatever. First off, we say that many heavily subsidized European countries have very similar policies or very similar mandates where they require their payment for these programs, or they have agreements where you must stay and work for companies from that country. But second, we say that even to the point we accept like that doesn't exist, or we said it doesn't exist, we would say that it is still principally justified to keep these people in these countries because we think that they still owe on a principal level to pay back for those government services that they were providing. We say under either case that our side is more principally justified and practically benefits these countries. Third off, though, we'd say, this is actually a better instance for a lot of these students in these cases because it allows for these universities to reinvest the money that they're getting paid from these companies in order to develop more programs, in order to develop better programs that actually make the Canadian government and the Canadian universities more competitive, make Canadian students even more competitive for those cool jobs they want to pursue them in the future. Meaning at that point, we were actually extending and giving them more right to mobility, more right to freedoms like afterwards than actually side opposition is given. Now, I'm going to get into my constructive argument. We're going to talk about the transactional relationship and why this is distinctly better for universities. First off, we think when you go to a company and you provide your services, you're compensated for those services. We think in a very similar manner, when you go to a university, they are directly providing you services and that you are going to pay them back for those services. We would say, though, at the point at which you don't pay by not making that contribution to society or paying your taxes, you are not giving them the money back from that transactional service. We also don't think that this is a problem. Why? First, we think the majority of Canadian universities are publicly funded, and they're dependent on government funding. We think that the point at which the government is not getting adequate funding from these people who are going to different countries, or they're not getting it from these companies, means that now they are no longer getting the funding directly back from the people they invested in. We think that this is a primary reason why a lot of STEM programs in universities are massively underfunded, is because the government does not have the ability to put money back because those talents go elsewhere. We think that therefore the investment on these programs doesn't warrant it because the talent doesn't stay, doesn't warrant that reinvestment. No thank you. We also, though, think that this is like very different as well when we mention the United States system, where if you're willing to pay it completely on your own, that's why you have the ability to go somewhere else, because you do not owe the government anything, you do not owe anything back to that country, you have paid up all your outstanding debts for all intensive purposes. We think that that is why systems like the United States are distinctly different from the Canadian system. Now, let's talk about like how we solve this. We think by making them directly responsible, we encourage these Canadian students to stay in Canada and contribute to Canada in order to pay this back. Two impacts out of this. First off, we think it is better simply principally, because we think that once you owe to society, like you have that obligation to pay it back. We think at that point it's more likely they're going to be productive members of society, as well as we think that once you have laid down roots and you are working jobs in Canada, you're much more likely to remain in Canada. We think that therefore you're going to contribute in the long run, and if you really so desire to move, like that is fine, you can do it down the road. We think though it's going to significantly decrease the number of people who do so. Second though, we think there's a distinct impact for universities. First, we think it's going to give Canadian universities more funding to boost their programs like STEM programs. Right? We think that's going to give them even more graduates, even more, offer more financial aid packages, for example, to have more people attend those programs, and ultimately go back directly right into the Canadian government. Second, though, we also think it sponsors programs like research and development for a lot of these schools that we're proud to propose.
I now call upon the second speaker from side opposition to speak for no longer than 7 minutes.
Madam Speaker, let me start off by saying one of the fundamental problems with the model that was presented by the House today. They failed to recognize the ability of a Canadian graduate of a STEM program from working at a Canadian technology company for 1 year and then leaving to the States for a higher paying job in a more desirable climate and in potentially a more desirable industry. This, I think, is a fundamental flaw in their argumentation. They talk about paying a debt to society that we get when we experience subsidized education in Canada, but completely offer no way in which this can be avoided. We experience free mobility in this country. We are allowed to move from province to province. We're allowed to leave this country and work in other places, given that we actually go through the right processes. But we really believe that this is a massive problem with their model, and I think fundamentally their argument that they're after. They also paint this picture of Canadian graduates that on majority are working in Canada. Then why create this policy? If they want to work for Amazon or Microsoft and Google, then who cares? Let them go. Really, if the concern is people leaving Canada, but then we're saying, oh, well, they all stay in Canada anyway, I don't really know what we're arguing about.
On your first point, would you rather have someone go straight to the US and contribute nothing to Canada, or work for Canada in like as little as a year and then go to the US? Which is better?
Under your policy, I think we kind of know what they're going to do. They don't even have to work for a year. They could work for a month. You have not specified. As soon as they get a paycheck, they've worked in Canada out of a STEM degree. This is a fundamental flaw in your argument and in how you model this debate. You then talk about how there's better instances for students that this policy would be better for students. In the sense that that they would be they want to work in Canada at a better job. But on an individual level, and I might agree with you philosophically, but there's a 30% currency advantage right now. Like if you graduate from a STEM program and you came from maybe a lower privileged background and you enjoyed this subsidized education, again I'm going to milk this emotional appeal, and you get to go through this program and we have the best in the world, blah blah blah. And then someone's like, you can get $85,000 Canadian, or you can get $85,000 US. Like, you're gonna go to the US. Like, it's simple. And then we have this idea of paying back for the services of your universities. We value education in this country, and we as a society have determined that this is a right that we grant our citizens. That doesn't mean that they owe a debt to society. They're trying to tell you that every Canadian university student is seeming like they owe their pound of flesh to the Canadian government for what they've done, and I think that this is fundamentally flawed. Now, I would like to get into my constructive arguments and build off of what our previous speaker talked about, but we're going to look at this through the kind of the impact on Canadian society as a whole. So we believe, despite what you heard out of the House, that this is actually going to result in less innovation and less investment in Canadian STEM. Simply put, this is, instead of addressing brain drain, this is just pushing brain drain earlier. Like, if you know that if you graduate from a STEM program in Canada, and you're going to be less competitive globally, not at this time, why would you even start here? You're going to go to a US institution, and we're just going to see a lack of talent coming to the Canadian institutions, and just this idea of early brain drain. And I think this is just a great example of how this policy is regressive. And let's paint that picture, right? So less people enter STEM programs in Canada. So that means less undergrads, which means less graduate students, which means less people researching at our institutions, which means less funding to STEM research. And we really want to be, like the House said, the future is in STEM. We want to continue to lead innovation and lead research and keep that investment coming into our STEM programs so we can keep developing great technology in Canada.
Do you really think that someone who is going to take on a graduate level math degree, something that's really not easy, is going to choose not to do that really not easy and challenging thing for a marginal amount of salary? Wouldn't they have to love it to do that anyway?
I think that as we move toward a more STEM future, as you guys have presented, and the demand for people with high-level math degrees or an AI graduate degree, we're not talking about marginal increases in salary. Like, this is the future. These people are in high demand. You can look at examples of PhDs are getting paid at a university, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, this is not like, you know, $60,000. Like, we're talking people that are making almost in the 1% of earners, and I think that's really where this is coming from. And again, I think this policy overlooks, and I kind of hit this point in my refutation, but it overlooks the lack of Canadian jobs for STEM graduates. Like, they wouldn't be leaving if there was all these jobs in Canada, and then you guys say that, you know, the majority of STEM graduates are working here. So I don't really know what to do with that. And then we really believe this doesn't address the issue that this policy and this House will try and tell you that this is doing. They want to keep STEM in Canada. I want to keep STEM in Canada. I want innovation in Canada. I would love Silicon Valley to start up in, you know, in Saskatchewan or in Alberta or Ontario, like Silicon Valley North. It'd be fantastic. But that's not what this policy is going to do. It's just putting a tax on people that want to leave this country to work in STEM. It's not a subsidy for the tech industry. It's not really going to diversify our economy. It's going to leave more government waste as we pay this $100,000 of subsidy from the Canadian government and then leave people jobless. So in summary, I think that we've really hit home that the model that the House has presented today is easily loopholed by anyone, and especially someone who chooses a degree that is really hard, like a math degree, and works for 6 months and then goes to the States to earn a higher salary in a more desirable work environment. And that is why we proudly oppose the policy. Thank you so much for your time.
I thank the member for his remarks. I now call upon the third speaker from side government to deliver a speech for no longer than 7 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, side opposition comes up and paints a really compelling picture. They paint a picture of someone who is jobless, who's dreamless, who's hopeless. They paint a picture of a lacking Canadian economy that really sucks. But ladies and gentlemen, it is a picture on a wall that doesn't exist. And we're here to show you why that is. Reality is on our side of the house today because we know how things actually work. We know that even if we accept their points, compared to the status quo versus the world under this resolution, we get more benefits even with their points. And I'm here to show you that today through thematic analysis of what they've said. So I'm going to break this down into the two biggest themes, actors of this debate we see, that being that of the individual, like the person going to school, and that being the rest of society, you know, the Canadian jobs, the Canadian universities, etc., all those actors. And to start off with the individual, I really loved it when the first speaker come up here and made a very nice emotional speech. But unfortunately, he ignored people like me. He ignored lots of people in this room. He ignored all the people that go to school in Canada and want to work in Canada. Now they talked about this later. They talked about how well, it's a contradiction, no thank you, that we say people are going to stay in Canada, but people also want to leave Canada. Well, I feel like it's not mutually exclusive. If half the people stay in Canada and half the people leave, we're still taking a huge tax burden from all the people that we educate here and leave. I don't see where there's a contradiction there. It just makes perfect sense to me. Now, the main principle they talked about in their first thing about how we're limiting Canadians' freedom is how this is so immoral. How the government should not be able to impose this restriction on Canadians and how it's so bad for them. Well, quite frankly, we don't see where this restriction is. Yes, we can accept, very much so, that Canadians are going to stay in Canada more often because the US jobs, a lot of them are less likely to get those jobs because they're going to be less competitive in the sense that it costs a lot to get them. We accept this premise. However, we believe we can win on the principle that this will be better for Canadian society. This will not be super detrimental as they would like to paint. We just see this in many different ways as I'm going to explain to you. On the regard of that principle and why this is immoral, we feel what is immoral is not contributing to a Canadian society that has done so much for you. We recognize that when you pay taxes, when the government donates basically $25,000 to your education, they do this with the expectation that people will contribute to Canada. And when they say oh, but it doesn't work because there's a loophole, let's just think about this for a second. First point, that's not even true, because to legally be considered an employee, you have to collect paychecks of the company for at least a year. But even if it was as short as a day, even under this resolution, we win on comparative between status quo and our resolution. Because let's just take a step back and think about it. I POI'd about this and they didn't really respond aside from just saying their point again. But what happens when you have the status quo is out of graduate school, an employee may be recruited and go straight to the US. They're done contributing to Canadian society. They're starting to work in the US and go down that path. But on the other side, in our house, let's say they work for 1 second inside of a Canadian company. The minimal amount, which like we already said it has to be a year for this resolution to apply anyway, but the minimum amount is already more contribution to Canadian society than can ever happen under their resolution. On comparative, no matter what they say, our side of the house contributes more to Canadian society than their side of the house does. No thank you on that point. It doesn't work. Now, like I already pointed out about how they said like there's a contradiction and like lots of people are going to just, like we said, people are going to stay and going to leave. Obviously it's the case for both sides. People are going to stay, people are going to leave. Our principle still applies. But now I'd like to talk to you about what I feel is the actor that is a lot more impacted than this debate, that they completely neglect in their first speech, and then like try and say stuff in their second speech that really doesn't work, as I'm about to talk to you about. They've talked about this idea of like a preemptive brain drain, essentially. Essentially that people are going to be disincentivized to go to graduate school because they can't go to the US. Well, I mean, they can go to the US, as we've told you like time and time again, but they might have to work in Canada a little bit first, or they might have to just be really, really smart enough that a US company would pay the $100,000, which if we want, like, this is often the case if someone's really, really smart. So we think that if these people try so hard and work so hard, like their first speaker's brother, then maybe they'll be able to earn that $100,000 from that company because that company wants them so much. But anyway, as I was talking about the preemptive brain drain point, the fact is, and I POI'd about this, if you love your subject enough to go to grad school, I think you're not going to be motivated to not go into that over what might be like a $20,000 difference between a Canadian job and a US job. Like working in downtown Toronto and working in downtown New York, like of course you think the glamour is different, but when you're working for the big boys in those cities, chances are you're making a lot of money either way. The marginal difference between these high-end salaries is not going to motivate someone who's so passionate and loves their job so much to go to grad school in STEM. Like, I think we need to characterize how hard graduate math is, or how hard graduate engineering is. These degrees are no joke, ladies and gentlemen. Like, people fail out of them all the time. People who do them are like wicked smart, a lot smarter than anyone on my team for sure. This is something that they have to do with a passion. And we see that when they say like, oh yeah, if they're making marginally less, they're not gonna do it, we just don't buy that analysis. We see that based on the analysis I just gave you, they're probably going to do it either way. They're probably going to get this education. And then if they get that education, like I've just worked towards proving to you, their entire second point on impacts on the Canadian society, or like on Canadian education system falls. Before I go into that, I'll take one POI.
I'm curious, does the Senate government not realize that people see what their income is going to be when they graduate? That's the reason why people pick their careers a lot of the times. Have you not done that yourself? Thank you very much.
No, actually, I originally started out looking to work in business where you make a lot of money, and then thought maybe I should transfer into a science program. So I really think that it doesn't matter that much. Like in this Western society, we kind of figured out that if you hate your job, no matter how much money you make, you're going to hate your life. Like that's a protected time. I get in the past that people like just focused on the money, but especially among progressive young people in school these days, happiness and life fulfillment is a lot more important. I don't mind. Now, to finish off with this refutation, the entire point about how the Canadian education system is going to fail because less people are going to go to school and less people are going to get jobs in Canada, etc., blah, 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 that doesn't work if their point about less Canadians going to grad school fails. I've just proved to you why that fails regarding like people's passion and how money works, and that continues to fail because obviously people are going to get a job after grad school. They're going to want to be employed. And we feel that since we've proven to you time and time again that there's a lot of jobs in Canada, like the ones given in our info slide, where it's hard to get all the positions you need filled because so many people are going to the US, we see this time and time again. Well, now those jobs are going to be filled, now the economy is going to be better, the education system gets more reinvestment, etc. We directly reinvest into education with this model, and we believe that is just going to be a cycle that continues this better education, this higher intellectual standard, and these better Canadian graduates. We win on both individual benefits and societal benefits, ladies and gentlemen. It's proud to propose.
I now call upon the third speaker from the opposition to deliver the last speech.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. There have been some really great points that have been made by both sides today. But before I continue to summarize our points, I would like to first refute side propositions points and show where they fall short today. First, I would like to start with one of their quotes. They talked about how this policy is only for immediate graduates. And we talked about, what if someone works within Canada for just a year and then leaves? This makes their policy completely pointless. So we asked them why they are proposing this in the first place. They also talked about how it is unfair for students to leave after getting a Canadian education. But what they fail to recognize that is actually unfair for these students to not have the equal opportunity to leave the country and represent our country. We are not giving our students the chance to be a global citizen. They also talked extensively about the monetary benefits. Of course, we're all commerce students, and we chose this program for a reason, because we're passionate about it, or because we want to earn lots of money when we're older. I'm sure some of you guys did that. But imagine being told that you can't work outside of Canada simply due to your program. They also fail to understand that benefits aren't just measured qualitatively. There are also quantitative ways to measure that.
Don't you think that someone would represent Canada on like an international level better if they like actually work in Canada and get industry experience rather than just graduating school and failing?
For over like 18 years. These are Canadian citizens. I'm pretty sure that living in Canada makes you know Canadian values and makes you able to represent Canada. The second speaker also attempted to justify their policy by talking about how our parents pay for subsidization through taxes. I asked side proposition to take a look around this room. Look at the diversity in this room. Do you think this would be possible without immigrant parents? What if you're a first-generation Canadian like me? My parents weren't able to benefit from subsidized education, yet they've paid for that in the 30 years that they've lived in Canada. So I don't think They also talked about how they want this because they want a return on the investment. This is extremely misguided, and I'm disappointed that I have to clarify this. Because we all know that investing in our youth shouldn't be based on how much they'll pay in taxes when they're older. This is education, and education is about encouraging youth to pursue their passions. It's not about prohibiting them from doing so. We talk about how our youth are being dreamless, but it is because of side proposition's policy that their dreams of being global citizens is being squashed. They also talked about how their policy is better for Canadian society, but is it really better to have less STEM Canadian students in the long term because they are deterred by your policy? They also talked about how these students need to give back. We all here have used Canadian healthcare, and I hope that all of us have at least attended elementary school. This is all funded by taxes. So does this mean that we all have to stay in Canada and we all have to work in Canada just because we also use it? That is what they're saying. They also talked about how even though math is difficult, people will find a way to do it either way because they're so passionate about that. And I wholeheartedly agree about that. I absolutely hate math. But this policy actually disadvantages people who love math, and it forces them to take an arbitrarily difficult path to doing what they love.
There's a reason why grads from Canada don't graduate with $200,000 of debt from STEM programs and therefore are barely able to afford their living based on their paycheck because of that debt.
I don't really understand the question, but I do agree that subsidizing really does help. And I'd also like to point out that proposition also brought up how they asked why we're subsidizing other fields as well. I think that they need to understand that the subsidizing works for every Canadian, no matter what field you're in, not just STEM. Okay, now I'd like to summarize what we've talked about today, we have two main contentions. We talked about the impact on our society, and we talked about the impact on individuals. For the individual impact, we talked about how their policy infringes on Canadian opportunities and limits our freedom. It is a regressive policy. We also talked about how this makes Canadians being unemployable just due to this $100,000 price tag on their head. We want Canadians to have the opportunity to be global citizens and to represent our country and its values. But their policy punishes people for pursuing their passion, and it pushes them out of pursuing their passion in STEM. Our second contention was about the societal impact. We talked about how their policy will lead to a reduction in research funding because top students will leave to pursue better options. We also talked about an earlier brain drain and how this has a direct impact on Canadian institutions, our institutions. We also talked about how their policy overlooks the lack of jobs within Canada for STEM graduates. We on side opposition are able to see that their policy is not effective and it is not the way to keep STEM grads within Canada. And that is why we on side opposition are so proud to oppose requiring all foreign companies recruiting Canadians graduating from STEM programs to reimburse the government for the subsidized education provided to those graduates. We want our graduates to be able to pursue their passions. We want Canadian youth to not be deterred from pursuing STEM, and we want them to have the chance to represent Canada and be a global citizen. They shouldn't be denied the ability to work outside of Canada simply because they're in STEM. Thank you for your time.
I thank the member for her remarks. We will now hear a 4-minute reply speech from each team, beginning with side opposition.
Madam Speaker, what have we heard out of the House today? We've heard about how Canadian programs and Canadian values that we've established over our long and proud history in this country somehow mean that each individual Canadian owes the Canadian system for any services they use, whether this is their university subsidization, which we're talking about today, but only when it's in STEM, because those are the jobs we want to keep in Canada. But this logic applies to healthcare. It applies to when your grandma has cancer, and does she now have owe the Canadian government for all the costs she has endured? Like, we don't think so, and I think that this is kind of where this argument goes. And I want to talk about how this policy really is about preventing STEM graduates from leaving Canada. Like, we both agree, we want to keep innovation, we want to keep tech in Canada, but this policy just fails to do that. They actually concede this point time and time again. They're like, yeah, these people will just leave, and then, if they're smart enough, the company will just pay this $100K bonus and it's fine. But the reality is, what we want and what the point of this policy is to do is to keep these people in Canada so that they develop this country, they develop our tax base, and they develop new industries in this country. And I think that's really where this policy falls short. Because they don't actually, this doesn't restrict people from leaving, and it doesn't restrict people from going to the States or anywhere else. And it just fails to accomplish what it seeks to achieve. And I want to come back to what we kind of opened this debate with, and this idea of this $100,000 price tag on a resume. We really need to think about this, because they on this side of the House talk about how the difference in salary between a Canadian job and an American job, it's like $20,000. If that's true, they're not going to pay this $100,000 price tag. If we're really talking about pennies, like they're saying, then it is really as non-competitive as we're making it out to be. People aren't going to be able to go to the US, and they're not going to be able to really utilize all of the amazing research that we produce in Canada, and that they benefit from these STEM programs. And I think this is really important. But I think really this debate comes down to how we want to view Canadian society and how we want to view higher education in this country. Is this about providing equal opportunity for every Canadian to pursue their passions, whether it's an undergraduate engineering degree or a graduate math degree? Really what our system is set up to do is to allow that immigrant family who moves to Canada to have their kid go to school in a subsidized environment. It allows the child that grows up maybe in the wrong part of town to go and become the next CEO of a tech company. And I think that that's really where this policy falls short. They are going to restrict the ability of these people to do just that. And that's why we proudly oppose. Thank you so much.
I thank the member for his remarks. We will now hear side government's speech to close out our debate.
Panel, we think that there is a reason that many Canadians can go into these STEM programs in the first place, and that's because of the large help that the Canadian government provides. We think in many other countries, this is the concept of student debt. The reason that why in countries like the United States, these graduates exit these programs with $200,000, with $300,000, with $400,000 of debt, where they can barely afford to pay, despite their massive salaries, for their day-to-day expenses. We would say, in a very similar concept to owing debt for going to these private institutions in the United States, you have an obligation, a responsibility, and a moral duty to serve in Canada, to pay taxes in Canada for what you owe. Largely, what we hear out of opposition today is a few things. Or first, actually, I'm going to talk about principle. That's my first thing. Let's tag that. First, limiting Canadian freedoms. Again, we say that first off, all these graduates still have the option to go to the United States, to go to Europe, to go to any other country they want. Right? We say the key difference is, if they go to those other places, they have to take on the full burden of paying the cost. We say that is perfectly fine with us if they want to do so. We would say the distinction we made for you on the proposition today is that by taking these subsidies, you are entering that contract with the government, in which through your taxes and through your contributions to those societies, that is how you are paying that government back. We think it is personally reasonable on a principle level to have students pay that back. We also, though, think that they're going to better represent the country of Canada in businesses when they've actually learned in Canada, because we'd say that largely where people construct their values, where they have independent thinking, where they gain the majority of their knowledge they're going to use in the skill set, is these universities that are in Canada. Also, though, they bring up this point about how we have immigrants, they pay taxes, they don't get any of these services. Again, first, patently untrue, they get many services like healthcare, they have their kids being able to go to education. But on top of that, we say the principal reason why immigrants can come to this country and have their kids go to these systems is because the STEM graduates pay back into these systems to allow them to actually get access to these subsidies to actually be able to go to school in the first place. Good take this debate because we've proven to you why we have this contract and this obligation to contribute to the Canadian society, and it is very reasonable on basis globally to pay back and contribute to that society. We talked to you in our points about why this is transactional, why this makes sense. On a practical level, though, right? Like the main point we get to out of opposition today is that less people are going to want to do STEM programs. Again, we think that first off, as Alan tells you, these people are generally highly motivated, they are going through multiple degrees, and they are doing it largely because they like the programs they're in, and we say that a lot of them are not motivated by money. We say that these are extraordinarily smart people. We say that even if they are motivated by money, we say that the marginal difference in the cost is not enough to make it substantial. We say that when you weigh the $200,000, $300,000 debt burden versus maybe the $20,000 less you make in salary, we'd say it still makes sense to stay in Canada and go to Canadian institutions. We'd say regardless of the situations, we'd say the opposition is still weaker on both sides. But lastly, they raise this idea of that we need to contribute to the world. We think again that contribution is made better in Canada because we think that these are the places where they have the most knowledge, where they're able to make the best contribution because they're most used to these societies and most able to actually live in. What did we tell you on our side of the house today? We gave you two very different impacts on the practical points. First, we told you about brain drain and why this specifically targets those companies that are like small and medium-sized STEM technology companies. We think that this was the primary actor in this debate that was largely ignored by every single speaker inside opposition. So on that basis alone, like they ignored the primary one. What we told you is why this is going to allow these STEM corporations, small and medium sized, to be able to actually hire graduates in these programs, to actually get good graduates from these programs, because we have such a large deficiency between the number of graduates and the number of job openings for these programs. We think for that reason, we're going to get much better Canadian technology companies. But second, we gave you the impact on the universities in which these people get their degrees from in the first place. We distinctly told you the reason why these universities cannot fund STEM programs as much as they should is because the people do not pay back into the government to provide the tax revenue for these programs to operate. We think on our side of the world we get a better principal environment where they are obligated to pay, and a practical one where we get a better workforce, better employees. We're very proud to propose.
At this time, with both teams, please leave all papers on the tables and follow the presentation facilitator.